Hello and welcome to Type Over 40 here on the Spacebook YouTube channel and from the makers of Type 40, a Doctor Who podcast from the Fandom Podcast Network. We are we're the before show, we're the after show, and we're the in-between show. And there's always something kicking off. There's a bit of fuss already. I think it could be down to this bloke. It's my guest for the show today, Mr. Adam O'Brien. Hello, Adam.
G'day, mate. How you going? How are you?
I'm fantastic, thank you. It may be cold outside, but it's warm in here. And I've got my Aussie mate for company. I've got Rosie here as well. She's behaving herself today, aren't you? Yeah. What more could a Doctor Who fan need? But yeah.
Oh, you just need a rocking dude like this, man. Get him out there, out in the outback. Get Max with him, and they can rock and roll.
Mad Max or Furious Max?
Oh, that's Furious Max, yeah. That really needed Mel Gibson, that movie, didn't it? You know?
I think it may have done. Yeah, let's get them both. We've said this before. Let's get the two Maxes in the same film. We want a 5 Doctors thing with Tom Hardy and Mel Gibson. I don't care how it happens. Bend the timelines. We don't care. Make it happen. Make it happen. Absolutely.
We want Tom Baker and Tom Hardy.
Tom Baker and Hardy on
Mad Baker
at the same time. They'd be chewing each other's ears off, wouldn't they? And all sorts. We don't know. We've got no idea about where that would go or how it would end. It would probably end, if not in bloodshed, then certainly in two grown men flat on their backs.
Like a bloody Red Dwarf episode, mate. That's what it'd be like. We would have Lister and the boys.
Probably would. Yeah, probably would. Boys from the outback, boys from the dwarf. Oh, we're already off on a tangent, aren't we? We have. Yeah. There's going to be plenty of tangents in this video. I promise you that. But the main reason why I wanted to speak to Adam, we wanted to bring him to account, didn't we, Rosie? Because we put out an episode of Type 40 recently, a fantastic podcast where we talked at length about that wonderful Doctor Who spin-off, Torchwood. Well, I say wonderful, some of it was wonderful, wasn't it? You know, it was a roller coaster of a ride, really. And on that show, we crossed the time zone on that show. We got Sarah, the starry-eyed girl in Sarah Graham, and we got Kyle Wagner, the War Doctor. We got him into, and we were talking about all of Torchwood. But there was one voice and one face that was sadly missing because obviously it's another time zone away. But it does mean that we can make some more Torchwood content and talk about it again. But the starting point, I think, has to be, as I mentioned on that podcast. There'll be a link to the podcast, by the way. I'm rambling already, everybody. There'll be a link to the podcast either up there or down there when we put a bit of production onto this thing. That's your responsibility. When we put a bit of production on, you'll be able to find the link to the podcast. You can find out what we're talking about when we say all this. But on that show, I mentioned a certain individual connected with the Fandom Podcast Network who prefers Torchwood to Doctor.
That's right. And folks, let me tell you, it's Kevin Reitzel. That's right. He goes, hey, man, Torchwood is the best. I'm telling you now, man. You know, you look at all these great shows, I don't get it. And Doctor Who is just ripping off Bill and Ted's.
Kevin gets thrown under the bus more times than a basketball, doesn't he? When you're around.
Dribbles a lot.
Yes, Mr. Kevin Reitzel, the esteemed founder of the Fandom Podcast Network, who we respect and revere greatly, of course. Yeah. Hi, Kevin. Yeah, this is the thing, isn't it? With Torchwood and Doctor Who, where do you stand? Why? Explain yourself.
Oh, straight up, it's Torchwood. Torchwood is the be-all and an end-all. It'd be like saying Millennium's the main series. You know, that's how I see it. Okay. Millennium is great, but X-Files is the base. And the thing is, Torchwood became something that is even more so that, you know, you've got Doctor Who, which I've always seen as, in majority, a family-friendly show. One that is, you know, explores so much content. But Torchwood's like, yeah, we'll do that. But guess what? We're going to do all of this as well. And they do. And they do it bloody well. Captain Jack and the team, to me, is a much more thorough, deeper, and an insightful show. But it doesn't have that long legacy that Doctor Who has. And it doesn't have Tom Baker.
Of course, all joking apart, they're very, very different shows. And with Torchwood, we get, obviously it's all set on Earth. We never go off world once, even though Captain Joe, who's Captain Joe? That's my son, Joe. You'll like that. Hello, Joe. Yeah, Joe does watch. That was for you, son. Yeah, no, because Joe talks, I'm doing it again, because Jack talks about what's gone on off-world and in other dimensions and stuff. It's chaos already, all the time. But in that sense, Torchwood does kind of connect with 1970s Doctor Who and the John Pertwee era, which is sort of where you come in, isn't it? And the John Pertwee era, where the Doctor was banished to Earth, working with units who, for all intents and purposes, a very similar organisation, weren't they, Rose? Yes, they were. They didn't go off-world either, apart from by accident. And all the threats were coming to us. And okay, there wasn't so much supernatural stuff, but it was embedded in a sort of team, albeit ones that aren't quite so well developed. A lot of 70s fans are going to hate me for that, but it is true. As much as I love the Brigadier, he wasn't as well developed as certainly as Captain Jack, and maybe some of the other characters. So that connection of yours with 1970s Pertwee Who, do you think that could be part of it, Adam?
It could be. Pertwee's great and everything, but the big one is when Tom came in. Tom came in and gave it psychedelic. He gave it strength. And he certainly gave it a character that people weren't ready for. But what's great about Torchwood was it wasn't just about one person and a couple of assistants or a couple of, people to support the Doctor. This was a whole team. I mean, you had close to about 9 people on screen at its peak. We're talking about John Barrowman as Jack Harkness, obviously. And it really ran this series, and obviously writes some of the books with I think his sister writes with him as well.
That's right, Carol Barrowman. Yeah.
That's right. But our actual eye into this was Eve Miles, Gwen Cooper. She really not only brought us in as an audience, you can you'll seeing it through her eyes, and really, all this amazing stuff's going on, but it leveled it, grounded it in a gritty tone. It's a very gritty show for something that was fantastical and sci-fi. And
you're right. I think she is a really, really relatable character, down to partly Eve Miles' own sort of personal. She's got this fragility about her, Eve Miles, in every performance that she gives in any show, really. But she's obviously a very formidable actress as well, very strong character, and she's able to bring something up from the basement. I don't want to use words like plucky, and I certainly wouldn't use words like feisty. I think all that's a cliche. I think that's from a long time ago. It's strong. It's strong. It's multi-layered. And to be fair, I think the same can be said of most of the cast of Torchwood. Owen Harper, Toshiko,
Burn Gorman, bloody Gorman.
Yeah, and these characters, and Burn Gorman is an actor you really like anyway, isn't he? Is that where you first saw him in Torchwood? Because that's where I did.
I'd seen, I think, the first 2 series, and it was hard to find in around here, season 3 and season 4. But they actually came out here in Australia to a couple of the cons. So I think it was Supernova or Oz Comic Con. So we met Naoka Mori, Gareth David Lloyd, and Burn Gorman.
This is the big reason why I wanted to talk to you at greater length, because the fact that you've met them next to all of them. You met so you met Owen Harper, Burn Gorman,
Toshiko Sato.
I'm so jealous. I've got such a crush on her. I really have. I'm very, very jealous.
And she's a very, very funny girl. Like actually, all 3 of them were very entertaining. They brought up a lot about the show, but what they also brought up was just their own dealings with fans, producers, all that sort of stuff at the time. This was, I believe it's 2015. It was when I was on another network called Jogcast Radio Network. And it was fantastic because, it's a time where they were out with another time traveler at the time, Doc Brown.
Oh wow! crossing the time zones and universes. They're on the same bill.
Same bill. He'd been going around and basically doing a lot of the signings and the photo ops and stuff like that. But they had a media room where anyone that was a podcaster or somebody that was a YouTube artist could go up there and chat to the guys as well. We weren't allowed to do video, but we could actually do the written interviews and stuff like that for the magazine. So we got to meet him, and it was a time when he was prepping to do Pacific Rim, which I think he just steals the performances of that, when he's talking about the kaiju and.
I've not seen it yet. No, I've not seen Pacific Rim yet. I didn't even know he was in it, to be honest.
Yeah, he's in that. Yeah, and Kevin Reitzel is also in that movie.
Is he really?
Now, folks, no, really. It's Charlie Day, I think, is the actor's name. He's a dead ringer for Kevin Reitzel. So every time I say, hey, I'm going to go watch that movie. And Kevin goes, I don't know what you're talking about, man. And then when he actually sees it, he goes, oh, yeah, Charlie Day. Yeah.
Well, we'll have to get a picture up of Kevin and Charlie Day then, so that our lovely viewers can see exactly who we're talking about. Yeah, it's the nicest thing you've said about Kevin, I think. Yeah, so when you went out in your capacity as a podcaster, you met the cast of Torchwood at this convention. Did you get a chance to speak to them directly? Ask them a question from the floor?
Yeah, we did. All of us did. All the journos that were there, obviously all the newspaper.
By that time, Torchwood had been finished a few years already. So what did you know?
Well, see, like I said, I'd only seen the first 2 seasons at that stage. Out here, the ABC had them erratically coming out because originally it wasn't ABC that actually had the program. We had it on primetime TV on Channel 7.
Oh, so it was on so it's still a biggish network.
Huge network. That's how like our big flagship one. So that's like you got your broadcaster, which is like government, so it's whatever the government puts out. But it was. I'm pretty sure it was Channel 7. It wasn't Channel 9 because Channel 9's our big one. But Channel 7, they do everything. They do all the sports. They do all the big stuff. But back then, in 2004 or 2006, somewhere around there, they bought out a whole heap of different shows, and that was one of the frontline shows because they had this promo playing every 15 minutes for about 2 weeks, and it was the Torchwood one.
So had you heard of Torchwood before that point? Because it was that kind of show where when it was airing in the UK, and from what Carl was saying, Carl from the Fandom Podcast Network, was our guest that week, wherever this show aired, it got everybody talking. And of course, we were well into the social media age by then. So you would have heard about Torchwood. You maybe have even seen pictures and maybe even got a couple of spoilers. So it's not that it was... Did it feel like you were getting it like years later and you already knew what was going to happen, or was it still...
No. We got it when it first aired here in Australia. But here's the thing. The channel itself made very clear that this was not a Doctor Who show. And they painstakingly put through all the advertising that this was not a Doctor Who show. Because, again, they're doing battle against Channel 2. Because Channel 2 is very cheap. Like, they don't have the money to really, be putting out... So they can't really produce the sort of shows that BBC would put together.
No.
They don't have that kind of money or clout, to really put something original out there. So when they get it, they're literally just a distributor. That's all they do. They just put it out. But what's interesting about it is that I remember Torchwood, especially up here in Brisbane, in Queensland, when it went to the free-to-air stations, so like Channel 7, they were like, yeah, this is like X-Files. That's how they were actually selling it. It's an X-Files.
Did they barely mention Doctor Who at all?
Doctor Who is not mentioned whatsoever.
Oh, wow. Because to be fair to them, and when the show does... I'm in the middle of watching season 1 at the moment. I've just watched what's it called? Small Worlds, I think it's called. The one about the fairies. And at that point, we've had scant reference to Doctor Who. We've had the Cyberwoman episode, which was... Obviously, that's an entire episode that's sort of nailed into Doctor Who lore. But other than that, you could probably pick up that show and watch it fresh as something different. In fact, I understand plenty of people, even in the UK, did. People who maybe had seen Doctor Who, some that hadn't and weren't particularly sort of connected to it in certainly the same way that I am. Because I do know a lot of people who they may have watched Doctor Who, they may have liked it, particularly at the time. But when Torchwood came along, it was a lot more their cup of tea, and it was aimed at them. I mean, we said this in the show. Torchwood is deliberately, when it started, it was a mainstream show, but it wasn't. It was because it was a big push from the BBC to put programming onto BBC Three that would and everything on that channel was pitched between the ages of 18 and I think it was 30, probably 30 to be honest, at the top. So it was deliberately tonally different and pushed it with swearing, with violence, with sexual content, and with the kind of stories that they told. So at the time, it seemed quite extreme. Of course, now, even though it's only, when was that? It's like 13 years since it started. Now, I wouldn't say it's tame, but you can see that times have moved on. And I do think that Torchwood was probably... Torchwood. was it Torchwood or was it Russell T Davies? I'm not entirely sure. A bit of both. They both played a big part in sort of pushing these things on, and certainly with representation, I've no doubt about that, because obviously that's one of the things that Russell T Davies he set out to do with both Doctor Who and Torchwood. But go on, I'm rambling again.
I've got to say, folks, can we get a refund? Can we get Russell T Davies back? Come on, come on.
Just imagine. That's all I'll say. Just imagine. When you saw them on stage, the cast of Torchwood, a few years after it had finished, what was your impression of how they relate to it a few years on? Because they still record the audios, obviously, but it's still as a show. It's not in production anymore. What was your impression there?
Impression is that they're highly respectful of what they've got. Man, that's them. Let's put it in business terms, folks. It's their meal ticket. It really is. I mean, that's what it is. At the end of the day. But there also there might not be Doctor Who fans going into it themselves too. You got to sort of fathom that idea, especially when you got Bill Pullman and Miki Pfeiffer going into it as well. But because that's outside of obviously the UK circles as well for casting. But when you look at this, they're highly respectful. The knowledge on it is probably about 75% of what, say, you would know on Doctor Who. They're well versed with their characters. They know the characters in and out, but they also have some really, really interesting stories about what happened on set and what happened for their characters, and what also their characters are being as an influence for people that love the show, and for fans. And honestly, to look at some other fandoms, especially ones I podcast about, I tell you what, you guys are very lucky. That's all of you Doctor Who fans out there. You have, on the majority, some of the greatest fans out there that not only care about the brand, but you care about each other as well. And that's
I think that is definitely the case, even in the times that we have now, where the fandom is more divided than it's ever been over one particular subject. At its core, you're absolutely right. That's sort of what it was founded on. I won't say we've always disagreed. We haven't. There's always been a lot of bickering, but with Torchwood, I think Torchwood, being that more of a niche thing and sort of being something in the past as well, that does cast a different light on it. But Torchwood always had a very sort of particular, closer connection to its fans. But by being a smaller show, I think that those who latched onto it harder than with Doctor Who, who would visit Yanto Shrine in Cardiff, that real world location that's still there 10 years after the fictional character's death, and the shrine is still there. I think that speaks for so much. I think they used to call themselves Woodies, just like it's a bit like Firefly, you got the brown coats and the Woodies. It was quite a movement for a while. Torchwood had its own line of figures, which were made by a different company who made the Doctor Who figures, its own line of comics, who at the time were with a different publisher. It'd be the same publisher now. It's Titan, when Doctor Who was with IDW. So there were two kind of different brands by default, really. So I would imagine that in Australia, even Australia, which we've already established, has this huge legacy with Doctor Who, since the 60s. So were people aware that it was connected with Doctor Who then, or when did it come as a surprise to you when you found out it was connected to Doctor Who originally?
Mainstream audiences had no idea, so they'd been watching the show from especially the first season. As you got probably about halfway through it, and this is what happened was eventually they got to a point where they put it on at like midnight, because it was originally airing at about 8:30 or 9 o'clock.
Oh, right? So they pushed it and pushed it and pushed it,
pushed it. And eventually Channel 9 just went or Channel 7, whatever. They said, "Do we still really want this?" And then Channel 2 said, "Look, it's Doctor Who. We'll take it." And there was a break for probably about a month or two, and then boom, Channel 2 just started airing them on whatever it was, Saturdays or whatever it was. Wow.
Just full on with its Doctor Who links proudly declared. Because over here, it was rolled out. The original sort of press releases about it when they first announced it, as the Doctor Who spin-off, it was a big deal. And at that point, Captain Jack, John Barrowman, everybody had loved the character, wanted to see more of him. But yeah, it was loud and proud as part of the Doctor Who brand. So it does seem odd that they would do that. But then, considering the content, they probably had time to watch it all through at that point, and maybe they'd wondered who it was for, how they would market it, and if they may get into trouble for people who would sort of insist on watching it even though it wasn't for them, because that was the thing over here too. I had very small children at the time, and it was a hard conversation in a sense to have, why they couldn't see this show that featured this character they loved so prominently.
Oh yeah, but the biggest one was the fact that those promos were pushing that this guy was the new Tom Cruise, and you kind of like look at it. He does have there's a kind of he's a tall Tom Cruise if he is. Yeah, that is of course Captain Jack. He does look like him. He's always looked
a little like Tom Cruise, I think. I think this has been a bit of a standing joke since the early 90s when I first became aware of John Barrowman. John Barrowman first came to light in the UK as a children's TV presenter, really. I mean, he'd been working as an actor on the stage for the most part, I believe. I'd never really heard of him until he turned up on Saturday morning TV on a show called Going Live as a sort of roving reporter. So he was a big ball of energy, very good-looking young man, and he would bound into the crowd with a microphone and no script, a bit like you. He would bound into a crowd of kids and just get them all talking, get them all sort of screaming for Take That or East 17 or whoever it was at the time. And he did game shows and all manner of things. And then he pretty much just vanished from British TV for years. And I saw his name on casting lists for, silly soap operas, sort of when they were trying to revive, weren't they, for a while, the idea of like Dallas and Dynasty in the 90s. I can't remember what the show was called, but John Barrowman was on that. And you could see he was played very much as that kind of cut price Tom Cruise, which I think does Barrowman quite a disservice, in hindsight. Tom Cruise is a great actor. He's in his own way, in his own right. But John Barrowman's a broader talent, isn't he, and a bigger personality. And he's probably got more appeal. I think more people would follow John Barrowman around than would follow Tom Cruise around. I think they do. And
probably right.
Yeah. I mean, not least of all for the fact that Tom Cruise would slap anybody with an injunction and a Scientology, whatever it is they do. But yeah, it's a curious thing. But he's still got that look about him. I mean, we talked on the show about John Barrowman and about the fact that he's obviously, this is 13 years on. John Barrowman looks great for his age, but obviously he does look older. We talked about Torchwood coming back and John Barrowman playing the character again. Would you like to see that? You used to look for Torchwood Series 5?
Oh, look, I'd love to see at least, or a mini series, something, put it back together. I think along with, I mean, you've got such a rich universe to bring some new talent in, some new characters, and maybe even a Doctor or two. You never know.
You'd love that, wouldn't you? Which Doctor, past or present, would you draft into Torchwood?
You had to say it, didn't you?
Yeah.
Baker.
I thought you were going to say that. What is it you think about Tom Baker? Do you think Tom Baker just fits that sort of...
And I've got a little ode for you, ladies and gentlemen, about the man himself, Mr. Baker. And, of course, the unsung appearance that didn't quite make it to television. And, of course, that is Shada. Shada. Tom Baker. Shada.
Very nice. I'm sure he'd love that. Yeah, because there hasn't been a series of Torchwood now for how long?
9 years?
8 years, 8 or 9 years. Yeah, and people still miss it. People still want it.
Mm-hmm.
They make the audios. Have you heard any of the audio dramas? Because you're dipping in with Big Finish at the moment, aren't you?
I love the audio dramas. The Big Finish have done such a fantastic job on the Doctor Who series, especially with a certain Doctor that was the movie Doctor, which I thought was fantastic. And, of course, star of Alien 3. That's right. The best Alien film. Yes, I'm going to say, folks, yes, even the Gov himself, Ridley Scott, yeah, that's a bloody good film, that, by David Fincher. He'd even say that as well. But getting back to yeah, it's a great film. It's a grungy, dark movie, and shot where they made the Titanic. I mean, for crying out loud, And I'm talking about The Bloody Boat. But look, no, I think the fantastic, Big Finish putting together that for Space 1999. They're doing work on Thunderbirds now as well, and
Are they?
Terrorhawks.
Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah, I know they're doing Terrorhawks. They've got a couple
great.
of box sets of Terrorhawks out at the moment. I haven't heard those. I haven't even seen the TV show of Terrorhawks for quite a while. But yeah, it's all good stuff from Big Finish. Star Cops is a big favourite of mine.
Oh, Star Cops is great, and you got your favourite buddy on there, of course. Mark Bonner from Scotland does such a bloody fantastic job on Big Finish and on Doctor Who last year. Well,
Mark Bonner he seems to be turning up in more TV and films than ever now. I'm not sure how long he's been around. Until recently, I've not seen you in a great deal, Mark. I've got to be honest. Maybe I have. Maybe I haven't.
You are a bloody legend, Mark. You are a lethal legend.
He does. He plays both villains and heroes really, really, really well. He's got all the sort of clout that you'd want in a commanding officer in a show like that. Yeah. So I haven't heard. I haven't heard that yet.
1999. Can you imagine that? He goes, right on. Let's get the Eagles up there, get them down, find out where that garbage is, and shoot the moon off in some crazy orbit all the way out there in the universe.
Space 1999 is having a big comeback at the moment. I'm not quite sure why it's happening now, but it is happening with the Blu-rays, with the audios, and general nostalgia for conventions and things. I don't know why now, but it's happening. I'm very glad it's happening. I haven't seen it for a long time myself. But shows like Space 1999 have got a sort of horror angle to it, and it was a very unsettling show from what I remember. And that's another thing about Torchwood. It also tapped into horror in the same way. There's a lot of body horror in it. There's a lot of they're not so, the sci-fi concepts aren't so big. The stakes aren't universal and galactic. They tend to be about about something personal, either in one of the core characters' personal past or something that affects a group of individuals in a very intimate way, and there's a lot of the darkness of human nature, and I think that Space 1999 did tap into that really, really well, and a lot of British science fiction does. You're somebody who takes in sci-fi and fantasy from all over the world, aren't you? Could you see that in Torchwood? Could you see that legacy?
Oh, look, I can tell you exactly what they should do, and this is something BBC. If you're listening tonight, listen to your Aussie brethren. So I'll put this in the best terms. British sci-fi is in a great spot right now. Yeah, here we go. Hey, mate, Mr. BBC, how you going, buddy? Guess what, mate? Torchwood would be fantastic right now, especially when going great guns with Doctor Who. You'd definitely have a new mini-series or something like that. But British sci-fi in its heart, you've got, obviously, Doctor Who is the big flagship, always has been. Red Dwarf, which has always been there as this beautiful comedy and a family. It really is a family of characters, 4 brothers, like really come together. Then you've got the likes of Space 1999, which is having a beautiful resurgence right now. Folks, be careful with season 2. It's a bit out there. But definitely season 1. And you get, of course, the big man himself from Flash Gordon in it, all these fantastic things. Yeah, of course, we're talking about
Brian Blessed
from Z-Cars. Yeah. And Brian, I even know about Z-Cars. That's right, out here in Australia. We know about that one you did back in the 60s. But there's, the fact
he plays almost exactly the same character in Space 1999 as he plays in Blake 7 as well. He's in those.
He's brilliant. But, you've got those. And then it's also, of course, I'm a big reader, so I read a lot of British sci-fi. British sci-fi for me is right up there with the best of it. I mean, you've got things like, I don't know if you guys have read this, but Alistair Reynolds, he's a fantastic writer who does some very gritty sci-fi.
I bet you have. I haven't.
You should. But also Peter F. Hamilton, who has put together an amazing series of books called the Night's Dawn trilogy. And this trilogy I read in the 90s and the early 2000s. And what was great about this one is he goes into the far future and sets it up by book 2. And all of a sudden, the gangsters from New York and Chicago rock up as almost like space zombies. Al Capone in space opera.
Oh, like real Real world sort of gangsters, like that episode of Star Trek, A Piece of the Action, is a bit like that.
Yeah, a little bit like that. They're just even crazier. Then, of course, you've got the mad Scotsman, the late great Ian M. Banks, who did the Culture series, which is closer to both Star Trek and Doctor Who than you would know. And the actual, I think, as a whole, the work that he's done in science fiction has really laid a set, if you like, of what is out there currently with things like The Expanse. Folks, if you haven't got The Expanse by James S.A. Corey, it's a fantastic show too.
Here we go again, Rosie. This is 3 people now. Monica Duarte was my guest on Side 40 last week, and she did a good 5 minutes about how great The Expanse was. So I've just got hold of Series 1 now. I've got that queued up and ready to go. Did
you hear what she said? What did she say? She said, "Exterminate. If he doesn't read those books and watch those shows, exterminate."
Yeah, she's very polite. She mutters it under her breath. With the Expanse, well, all the stuff that sort of carries on now, and all the stuff from the past. I mean, sci-fi never stops developing, does it? But there are
grows. Yeah,
there's different levels to it, and I think when Doctor Who was at the centre of this fictional universe, when it got Torchwood and the Sarah Jane adventures for the kids, I think I would say it was at its strongest, and I would argue that case all the time. Anybody wants to come on here and disagree with me, I would say that was its strongest time in recent memory. But with the stretching back through the past, what I noticed about the one that I watched recently was the one about the fairies. That was written by Peter J. Hammond, created and wrote all of Sapphire and Steel, for example. And there was numerous writers, old and new, veteran writers and new writers that were used on Torchwood. Noel Clarke, for example, he wrote and directed for Torchwood.
That's right. Helen Rayner and Chris Chibnall. You had Toby Whithouse. Don't
mention Chris Chibnall. But yeah, Toby Whithouse, again, Toby Whithouse, before he created Being Human and all those other things that he's done on Doctor Who, but Being Human, his own show that had that big legacy now of its own with an American remake and things. But the things that strike me about Torchwood are how it's still sort of pinned into a British way of telling sci-fi stories, set out in the 50s by the writer Nigel Neal, the Quatermass, the year of the Sex Olympics, all the Kinvig Beasts, all these different. He was a very experimental writer, but a lot of his shows, a lot of his screenplays, had a similar sort of strong core idea and a principle, an essential sort of what if that was used as the springboard. And that was, there were what if sci-fi concepts certainly were at the heart of series 3 and 4 of Torchwood, Children of Earth and Miracle Day. And in a sense, I don't know how you view it now, but I thought about this a lot since we made that podcast. Link again. Since we made that podcast, in a sense, how Torchwood grew so quickly, Adam, from that week-to-week series where there were one-off stories to those bigger event series. It grew so quickly in both popularity and with the concepts that it was playing with and talking about. In a sense, where was there left for it to go? It had either got to have another really strong concept like that, which obviously if Russell T Davies would have had one, he would have made a Series 5 somehow, I would say. I don't think it could go back to being week-to-week adventures in the same sense as it had been. So you think, well, okay, is it a pity that it evolved so quickly, or should they have limited it and maybe we'd have been like 10 series into Torchwood by now? It's so hard to say, because if something is creatively growing, you know that as a creative person yourself, if something is creatively growing and there's this sort of momentum behind it, in a sense, you're mad not to capitalize on it and make something bigger and something better. But I think in Torchwood, in doing so, particularly when taking it to America, there was a sense of when stars weren't interested anymore, and when audiences didn't like Series 4. I didn't like Series 4. Kyle and Sarah didn't. We'll ask you about it in a moment. But once people do have not such a positive reaction to it, the wind immediately sort of leaves its sails, and the thing ends up landlocked for 10 years. It seems such a shame.
A long time.
Yeah, that brave production and brave ideas and a brave series, that its reward after all that time is to be not forgotten, but to be left in the past. How did you feel about Series 4 of Torchwood, how it all went?
I personally think it was too short. I think if they're going to end that on that season, it needed to go longer, more long. But what's the answer to it? At the end of the day is to change the format. It needs to either be longer form. Yeah, the format just needs to change. It's as simple as that. One of the best things that some of these other franchises are doing is limited series. So, I suppose a little bit like Sherlock Holmes, where they do, one series, they do another series, and then that's it. It's done. Like it's not an ongoing number of seasons, which is what Torchwood was. So for me, it needs to be either mini-series or you just look at it a season of storytelling, do the whole lot, and it's one major theme.
I suppose it wouldn't really, in the same way, and I don't suppose it really matters really when if you focus less on characters and more on using the series to frame an idea like that, you could pick it up if you like 5 years later. It doesn't necessarily make a lot of difference. It's a shame to leave people to go without it for that long, but it doesn't. People do that with movies all the time. Which, come to think of it, that was something else we talked about, because John Barrowman very, very recently was talking about a Torchwood film. John Barrowman's always up for anything, really, isn't he? But he was talking about a Torchwood film. He was talking about a Torchwood film this time, with presumably, it would be backed by the BBC, because the BBC does make movies usually with co-investors. So, given the fact we're talking about big ideas, a feature-length Torchwood with a strong idea for 100, 120 minutes. Would you like a Torchwood movie instead? What would you rather do, movie or TV show?
Torchwood Begins.
Torchwood Begins. Oh, yeah. Go right back to sort of Victorian times, maybe.
Bring it on. Like, literally go back and set it all up. And the thing is...
You could cast whoever you like then. We could cast whoever we like. Get your suggestions.
We could. Yeah. Because that's the thing, it opens everything up. It's one of those key ingredients. And look, folks, I think that's the thing, is the end of the day, we've seen other franchises do it quite successfully. Mind you, with the help of somebody like J.J. Abrams, especially, when you've got Star Trek, was quite successfully rebooted. It's along with probably James Bond, with Casino Royale. Those were very strong reboots.
I feel so. Yeah, I'm a big fan of Star Trek 2009, certainly.
Yeah, definitely. Not so much that second one with cucumber salad patch.
No, I wasn't quite so keen on that one myself either.
But I like Benedict. That's the thing, is it was just the wrong role. It was the wrong, and the movie itself was just all over the place. And I had the actual enjoyment of sitting down to watch the first film. And now I'm not talking about the 2009, the theatrical first movie, Star Trek, the slow motion picture. Yes, that's right, the first one. And I got to sit down with the writer of the actual novelization. And to be honest, he's the guy that really came up with the concept, because the amount of writers that went into that movie, it just changed. And
James Bliss. Was James Bliss write that?
No, Ellen Dean Foster.
Was it? Oh, okay.
Yeah. So he didn't write the movie, but he wrote the novelizations that came through. So
he wrote the Alien books as well, didn't he? He wrote Alien and
yeah. And he's also done Star Wars. So he ghostwrote the first one, because really it was George's concept. Yeah. And then he did Splitter of the Mind's Eye, just in case if it did terrible. Sitting down with him is a lot of fun, because he really takes things. He's a very organic storyteller, very fantastic storyteller. But he was talking about the science that went into the old ones. There was always a grounding. And then all of a sudden, JJ comes along and goes, red pill. And they're like, huh? Red pill? Yeah, it's all good. It's like the Force. And they're kind of like, yeah. But it worked. It worked for what it was. I'm not sure. What's a red pill? Maybe it was a Dalek pill. Who knows? But fantastic to sit down with. And the thing is, what was great about that night, and this is going back about 8 years now, we sat down to watch it in one of the older cinemas here on the Gold Coast. And what they had was, we said we're going to this thing to watch a remastered print. So this was meant to be the brand new one that Paramount had put together, put all their money into, clean up the visuals, you really give it a beautiful new Dolby Atmo sound. And yeah, so anyway, everyone's sitting down, and Alan's like, "Yep, this is going to be great. It's going to be fantastic." And then they press play in this big cinema, and you hear this sort of to the audio, and you go like, "What's wrong with the audio?" It ended up being one of the very first prints made off the master back in '79. They gave them the wrong print.
Whoa! So
we were actually
you still
one
watched
of the ones
it?
they had Dan's Chinese song. Yeah, we watched it.
That would have been quite special in itself. I'd quite like that. Yeah,
it was. It ended up being something that's probably even more so, like, you know, a great experience.
You live it pretty large. Not the geek life, but yeah. Well, would you call it the geek life? Yeah, call it the geek life. But you like to go. Just call it the mullet life. Yeah, with conventions and on screenings and all these sorts of things, it is. I do recommend getting to these things. I've been to precious few. I'd love to get to a few more now. Mm-hmm. We'll have to see about that over however long, the near future.
We'll have to get Dan to come out to the Mullet-a-thon.
That's it, Mullet-a-thon. That's it. He needs a festival. You need a festival. You need your own festival. Yeah, we'll get them all out then. We're going to get you back on at some point in the near future on the podcast, that is, and probably on the video, Adam, because we do need to talk about. We're going to talk about Douglas Adams and Sharda and City of Death and Pirate Planet, all those sorts of things.
Sharda.
We've been promising that for a while, so that will be coming up. That will be on the podcast, on Type 40, a Doctor Who podcast at some point in the future. We'll pull you back in for more videos at some point, because this has been fun. Just for anybody who hasn't seen or heard of you yet, imagine that. Anybody who hasn't seen or heard of you before, Adam, and maybe watching this, tell them where they can find you, where they can hear you, and where they can see you.
Well, folks, on the socials, you can find me at The Lethal Mullet on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Go and type that in there, you'll find me. You find me on FPN's The Lethal Mullet podcast. I guarantee a few laughs in there. You might even learn something about B-grade action films, even if you don't want to. You'll find out. You'll find me on Type 40 here and there, stirring the crap out of Dan. It's a lot of fun. And I also jump on, from time to time, Blood of Kings to school Mr. Reitzel in the ways of football.
There you go. Now you know. So, yeah, more Adam O'Brien than you could possibly handle. But, yeah, the Lethal Mullet podcast, fantastic. I've been a guest a couple of times myself, and I think you're going to have me back at some point, aren't you?
We're going to get you on very, very soon for a series of films. And the first one is, of course, 1992's, I believe it was. Or is it 95? Can't remember now. It might have been 92. Rutger Hauer's Split Second, a gothic masterpiece set in London. And he goes, "I've got a 357 Python Magnum, and I'm going to take out the trash."
I haven't seen that one. I haven't seen that for years, so we'll have to get that watched before.
Before you wrap, folks, I'm going to give you a B-grade movie trailer voiceover for Sharda. So here we go, folks. Are you ready?
Listen to this, Rosie. Yeah.
Sharda is an unaired serial of the British science fiction television series Doctor Who. That's right, Tom Baker's back, and this time he's going to prison. The prison planetoid of the Time Lords. And he's taking his shotgun with him, and he ain't taking prisoners. Tom Baker, Sharda.
Tom never takes any prisoners.
No, he doesn't.
I'm considering myself stirred. I'll go and rewatch it. I'll go and rewatch it now, and we can get talking about it on the podcast soon. Thanks for dropping in, Adam. It's been fun as always. And yeah, I'm sure that we always have fun, don't we, Rosie? But yeah, thank you for watching. There'll be more of these videos coming up. We've already made a dozen or so. Like, subscribe, share. Rosie's dancing. She's that excited. Like, subscribe, share, comment, and yeah, get in touch. Because yeah, if you do like the videos, it just helps bump them up a little bit. I'm not quite sure how algorithm. I can't say it, let alone work out how algorithm.
Comment below here too if you'd like Rosie to have a mullet. That's right. Comment in the comments below.
I can see that actually. Yeah. So what was I saying? Like, subscribe, share, get in touch. You can find us on Facebook as well. Join our Facebook group, Type 40, a Doctor Who fandom podcast, a page. Oh, what else? I'm exhausted. Time to go. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching, not listening. Oh, you know what I mean. Bye-bye.